You were almost asleep, your whole body relaxed, your mind beginning to switch off, and then, suddenly, boom, a sharp jolt runs through your body, as if someone had pushed you or as if you were falling into the void. Your heart races, your eyes snap open in fright, and sleep, which seemed guaranteed, simply vanishes. Have you ever experienced this? This sensation is so real that, for a few seconds, it feels like something has gone terribly wrong. Some people even feel their whole body jump on the bed, others only experience a spasm in their legs or arms, but it's almost always accompanied by that strange sensation of falling, as if the ground has disappeared. And the question immediately pops into your head. Is this normal or is something wrong with my body? The most curious thing is that this phenomenon happens to millions of people worldwide, of all ages, cultures, and lifestyles. Even so, many people have never heard a clear explanation of what is really behind this jolt when we are falling asleep. Some believe it's anxiety, others think it's accumulated stress, some believe it's just imagination. But what science has to say about it may surprise you. Imagine the scene. The room is silent, breathing slows, muscles gradually relax. Your brain begins the transition between wakefulness and sleep, that delicate moment when consciousness begins to disconnect from the outside world. It is precisely in this interval, in this limbo between being awake and asleep, that something strange can happen. Unexpectedly, the body reacts as if it were in danger, even without any apparent reason. Many people describe this moment as a shock without a shock, because there was no noise, no real threat, but the body responds as if it needs to wake up immediately. The heart races, breathing changes, and for a few moments the feeling is one of total alertness. If you've ever experienced this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you've never paid much attention, you've probably felt it at least once in your life. The most intriguing thing is that, in some cases, this jolt is accompanied by fleeting images in the mind. A flash dream of you tripping, falling down stairs, slipping, or simply plummeting into the void. It all happens in fractions of a second, as if the brain had created a little story just to justify that abrupt body movement. Have you ever noticed this? What almost no one realizes is that this phenomenon reveals much more about the workings of the human brain than it seems at first glance. It involves how the brain controls muscles, regulates sleep, interprets internal signals, and reacts to sudden changes in the state of consciousness. It's not just a random spasm. There's a mechanism behind it, studied by neuroscience and sleep science. And here's an important detail. Although extremely common, this jolt often generates fear, especially when it happens frequently. Some people even think they are developing some neurological or cardiac problem. Others simply become restless, trying to understand why their body reacts this way precisely when it should be resting. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover could completely change how you view that strange moment before bed. The explanation involves primitive reflexes, misinterpretations by the brain, and even survival mechanisms inherited from ancient times. None of this is random. Now, before moving on, consider this. If the body is relaxing and the mind is shutting down, why does the brain decide to intervene so abruptly? What exactly is it trying to do at this critical moment between being awake and falling asleep? That's what we're going to start unraveling from now on. And that's precisely why this type of experience sparks so much curiosity. Because, at its core, it touches on something very human. The feeling of losing control for a moment and realizing that our own body reacts even before we understand what's happening. If while you're listening to this, some memory comes to mind, a specific night, a sudden fright, that strange sensation of falling, know that you're not alone. This phenomenon connects people all over the world, even though almost no one talks about it in everyday life. By the way, if this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what resonated with you most or what your experience was like. Did you feel a strong jolt? Was it just in your legs? Was it accompanied by a strange dream or a jolt in your heart? When you share this, you're not just commenting on a video, you're helping other people realize that what they feel is also real, common, and deserves to be understood. And if, up to this point, this content has already made you look at your own body in a different way, consider leaving a like. This simple gesture shows the algorithm that this type of scientific curiosity, about the mysteries of the brain and the human body, deserves to reach more people. That's how this type of conversation continues to exist here. Subscribing to the channel is also part of this. Each new subscription is a sign that it's worthwhile to delve deeper into these strange, real, and fascinating phenomena that science is still uncovering. It's a way of saying, I want to continue to better understand my mind, my body, and everything that happens when no one is watching. Your participation here is what keeps this space alive, grows this curious community, and allows more people to find answers to experiences that, for a long time, seemed inexplicable. And now that you're completely immersed in this topic, it's time to take a closer look at what really happens in the brain at the exact moment the body decides to react. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because what seems like just a random fright has a name, a history, and a solid scientific explanation behind it. This jerk that happens when we're falling asleep is known as a hypnic jerk, a phenomenon widely documented by sleep science and studied for decades by neurologists and researchers of the human brain. Knowing this completely changes how we look at this experience because it takes the phenomenon out of the realm of fear and superstition and places it within the realm of how the body actually functions. The hypnic jerk occurs precisely at the moment when the brain is making one of the most delicate transitions of our daily journey, moving from a state of full alertness to sleep. This process is not a simple flipping of a switch. It involves a series of automatic brain decisions, chemical adjustments, changes in electrical activity, and profound shifts in the communication between mind and body. While you feel like you are just switching off, behind it all, a true transformation is happening silently. During this moment, the brain begins to reduce muscle tone, slow breathing, and alter how it processes external stimuli. However, things don't always happen in perfect synchronization. Sometimes parts of the brain enter resting mode before others. And that's when the hypnic jerk occurs. It is basically an involuntary response of the central nervous system to this abrupt transition. It's not your imagination, it's not weakness, it's not a sign that something is breaking inside you. What's most fascinating is realizing that this mechanism holds a hidden truth about how the brain evolved. For thousands of years, our ancestors slept in unsafe environments, often in trees, caves, or places where excessive relaxation could mean a fall or an attack. Some scientists argue that the hypnic jerk is a remnant of this primitive protective system, a kind of safety reflex that kicks in when the brain interprets, albeit mistakenly, that the body is losing stability. It's as if, behind the scenes, the brain is saying, check if everything is okay before shutting down completely. This detail changes everything because it shows that the hypnic jerk is not a mistake, but a byproduct of an extremely sophisticated survival system. It reveals how the brain prioritizes protection, even when there is no real danger. And this connects directly to much broader themes such as mindset, automatic decision-making, and how the body reacts even before consciousness realizes what is happening. Many of our daily reactions follow this same logic. The body acts, the mind explains later. Another interesting point is that the hypnic jerk doesn't happen in isolation. It's usually accompanied by a brief adrenaline rush, which explains the accelerated heartbeat and the feeling of immediate alertness. In practical terms, it's as if the brain gives itself a small reset before allowing sleep to continue. This surge isn't dangerous, but it's intense enough to be clearly felt, especially in more sensitive people or during phases of life marked by stress, mental pressure, and excessive stimuli. Science also observes that this phenomenon is more common during times of emotional transition. Periods of major change, important decisions, accumulated anxiety, or even a mentally overloaded routine can increase the frequency of hypnic jerks. Not because the body is ill, but because the brain is operating in a state of heightened vigilance. It's as if it has difficulty fully trusting that moment of rest, keeping one foot in a state of alert. And here's a point that almost no one mentions. Understanding the hypnic jerk is also understanding how the brain deals with control. Sleep demands surrender. It requires the mind to relinquish conscious control and allow automatic processes to take over. For some people, this surrender doesn't happen smoothly. The jerk appears as a brief, almost symbolic interruption of this transition, a reminder that the brain is still there, monitoring everything. When viewed from this perspective, the phenomenon ceases to be merely a nighttime fright and becomes a window into understanding the impact of our routines, our choices, and the accelerated pace of modern life on the body's internal workings. The hypnic jerk becomes part of a larger journey, involving balance, rest, and the relationship between mind and body in a world that rarely slows down. And as this understanding deepens, an even more interesting question begins to emerge. If the brain reacts this way precisely when it is trying to rest, what exactly is happening internally in that fraction of a second when it confuses relaxation with danger? That's where the revelations become even more surprising. Before moving on, write in the comments, "That makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding exactly what happens during the transition between wakefulness and sleep completely changes how we perceive this strange yet common jolt. This moment isn't simply a shutdown of the body as many people imagine. In fact, it's one of the most complex and delicate processes the brain performs every day, a true behind-the-scenes operation involving fine-tuning between mind, body, and nervous system. When we are awake, the brain maintains a high level of communication with the muscles. There is a constant minimum tension even when we are relaxed. This allows for small movements, posture, balance, and quick reaction to any stimulus. As sleep approaches, the brain begins to make a series of automatic decisions. It understands that the body needs to enter rest mode, conserve energy, and prepare for a completely different state of functioning. This is the beginning of the transformation. At this point, breathing begins to slow down and become deeper, the heart rate tends to decelerate, and the muscles receive fewer electrical stimuli. It's as if the brain is lowering the overall volume of the body, decreasing the intensity of everything to allow for rest. However, this process doesn't happen in a perfectly aligned way. Some areas enter this state before others, and that's where the strange sensation arises. While one part of the brain is already operating in a sleep-like state, another remains partially alert. It's as if two different systems are running simultaneously for a few seconds. One saying, "Relax, everything is safe," and the other still asking, "Are you sure?" This lack of synchronization creates a kind of internal conflict. The body begins to relax too quickly, and the brain, upon perceiving this abrupt drop in muscle tone, interprets the signal as something unexpected. Herein lies a hidden truth that is rarely explained simply. The brain doesn't experience the world as we consciously do. It interprets signals. And when the muscles shut down too quickly, its interpretation might be loss of control. For a system shaped over thousands of years to ensure survival, losing control has never been a good idea. So it reacts, not out of conscious fear but as an automatic protective mechanism. This is the exact moment the spasm occurs. An intense electrical signal is sent to the muscles, causing the jolt. It's like a quick test. Does the body still respond? And it does. The heart races, breathing changes for a few seconds, and consciousness briefly emerges from near sleep. All of this happens in a fraction of a second, but the impact is enough to be clearly felt. The most interesting thing is to realize that this doesn't mean something went wrong. On the contrary, it's a sign that the brain is working, making decisions, assessing risks, even when you're not consciously aware of it. This mechanism reveals how much we are guided by automatic processes that don't involve rational thought. Many of our daily reactions follow exactly this same logic. The body reacts first, the mind creates the explanation later. And when we observe this with a little more attention, we realize how this phenomenon connects with other areas of life. The way we deal with changes, with moments of transition, with the loss of control, and with the need to slow down. Sleep demands total surrender. It asks you to let go of control, to trust your own body. For some people, especially those who live in a constant state of alert, this surrender doesn't happen smoothly. We live in a routine marked by excessive stimuli, quick decisions, mental pressure, and little room for real pauses. The brain gets used to operating in vigilance mode. When it's time to switch off, it finds it difficult. The hypnic jerk, in this context, can be seen as a reflection of this accelerated mentality, a sign that the system is still learning to truly slow down. This explains why this jolt is usually more frequent during periods of stress, anxiety, or major changes. Not because the body is failing, but because the brain is overloaded with information, decisions, and responsibilities. It takes longer to accept that the moment is safe enough to rest. The impact of this goes beyond sleep. It reveals how the pace of modern life influences even the most automatic processes of our body. By understanding what happens during this transition, the experience ceases to be frightening and becomes almost revelatory. The spasm is not an enemy. It is a messenger. A sign that there is a temporary imbalance between mind and body, something that can be adjusted with more awareness, balance, and care for one's own routine. It's not just about sleeping better but about understanding how you conduct your daily journey. And the more we observe these inner workings of the brain, the clearer it becomes that this small jolt is just the tip of the iceberg of something much larger. It's the visible tip of a complex, deep, and nuanced process involving how the brain interprets the internal world when the external world begins to fade. There are even more surprising details hidden in this microscopic interval between being awake and asleep, details that reveal how the brain can confuse relaxation with threat in a matter of milliseconds. If all of this is starting to make sense to you, write it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because here we enter one of the most intriguing and, at the same time, most uncomfortable theories for those who experience this phenomenon. There is a widely discussed hypothesis in neuroscience that suggests that, at that exact moment of transition to sleep, the brain may interpret muscle relaxation as something much more serious than it actually is. Instead of understanding that the body is simply entering a state of rest, it reads the signal as a possible fall, a collapse, or even an extreme threat to the body's integrity. This interpretation doesn't happen consciously. It's not as if the brain rationally thinks that you're falling or dying. It's an automatic, primitive process, built into the background of human evolution. When muscles relax too quickly and body awareness changes abruptly, the brain receives confusing information. The body is losing support. For a system designed to ensure survival at all costs, this is a major warning sign. That's where the sudden reaction comes in. The brain sends an intense electrical command to the muscles as an attempt at immediate correction. It's as if it were saying, wake up, react, check if we're still safe. The jolt is that response. A quick, involuntary movement, accompanied by a surge of adrenaline that prepares the body to act. Not because there is a real danger, but because, in that millisecond, the brain believes there might be. What's most striking is realizing that this reaction is very similar to other survival reflexes we still carry today. When you stumble, for example, the body reacts even before you understand what happened. The hypnic jerk follows the same logic. It's a decision made without consulting consciousness, based on ancient protective patterns. This hidden truth shows how much we are still guided by ancestral mechanisms, even living in modern and safe environments. This theory also helps explain why so many people report the sensation of falling associated with the jolt. The brain not only sends the muscular command, but tries to make sense of it by creating an instantaneous narrative. In fractions of a second, the image of plummeting, slipping, or losing one's footing emerges. It's an automatic attempt to organize the experience, to transform a bodily signal into something understandable. The mind creates the story after the body has already reacted. When viewed from this perspective, the hypnic jerk ceases to be merely a curious phenomenon and becomes a revelation about how the brain constructs reality. It doesn't wait for absolute certainty to act. It acts first, interprets later. This pattern influences much more than just sleep. It impacts decisions, emotional reactions, sudden fears, and even that inexplicable feeling of alertness that arises in seemingly tranquil moments. Another fascinating detail is that this response tends to be more intense in people who maintain a high level of control. Individuals who spend the entire day solving problems, making quick decisions, and dealing with constant pressure often have more difficulty surrendering control to sleep. The body tries to relax, but the brain resists. When it perceives this relaxation as a fall, it reacts even more strongly. The impact of this is directly on the quality of rest. This theory also helps to understand why the phenomenon can occur even in healthy people, without any neurological problems. It's not a failure but an overzealousness of the nervous system. The brain prefers to err on the side of overprotection rather than risk not reacting. In evolutionary terms, this has always made sense. In modern life, however, this mechanism appears in situations where there is no threat whatsoever, creating strange and disconcerting experiences. There is an even deeper layer to this journey. The hypnic jerk reveals how poorly the brain handles abrupt transitions. It prefers gradual, predictable changes. When something changes too quickly, whether it's muscle relaxation, an emotional shift, or a break in routine, the system goes on alert. This is reflected in sleep, but also manifests in other areas of life, such as difficulty switching off the mind, anticipatory anxiety, and a constant feeling of vigilance. Realizing this can be transformative. Not in the sense of eliminating the phenomenon immediately, but of understanding what it symbolizes. The jolt is not just a physical shock. It's a sign of how the brain is interpreting the moment. It's a reaction that says a lot about the internal rhythm, about the level of accumulated tension, and about how the body is dealing with rest. And the more we observe these behind-the-scenes events, the clearer it becomes that the brain doesn't perfectly distinguish between what is real and what is interpreted as a threat. It works with probabilities, not certainties. If there's the slightest chance that something is wrong, it reacts. The hypnic jerk is this reaction condensed into an instant. A protective reflex that arises precisely when you try to disconnect from the world. This understanding opens the door to an even deeper question. If the brain reacts this way to extreme relaxation, what happens when other factors come into play, such as daily habits, stimulant consumption, stress levels, and irregular sleep patterns? The answer begins to reveal how small choices throughout the day directly influence this critical moment between wakefulness and sleep. Leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because here we enter one of the most fascinating aspects of this phenomenon. The reason why the jolt is almost always accompanied by strange dreams or that vivid sensation of falling. It's not a coincidence, it's not imagination, and it's certainly not random. There's an extremely rapid process happening behind the scenes in the brain, where movement and mental image are born practically at the same time. When a hypnic jerk occurs, the body moves first. This electrical command reaches the muscles before the conscious mind has any chance to interpret what is happening. The brain, which hates gaps and inconsistencies, immediately springs into action to make sense of that unexpected physical reaction. It needs to explain the movement. And it does so in the fastest way it knows how, by creating a narrative. It is at that exact moment that mental images arise, such as tripping, slipping, falling down stairs, plummeting from a building, or simply losing one's footing. Everything happens in fractions of a second. The sensation is so real because, for the brain, it is real. At that moment, it doesn't differentiate between cause and consequence. The body moved, so something must have caused that movement. The story comes later as an automatic justification. This instantaneous creation of images reveals a hidden truth about the workings of the human mind. The brain is, above all, a storyteller. It is constantly trying to organize experiences, connect events, and create meaning for what happens, even when the data is incomplete. In the case of the hypnic jerk, it receives only a raw signal, sudden movement. And from that, it constructs a coherent scenario in milliseconds. The impact is so strong that many people swear they were dreaming before the jolt, when in fact the dream occurred after the movement. The order is reversed. First comes the physical reaction, then the mental image. But the subjective feeling is that everything happened at once. This confusion reinforces the intensity of the experience and helps it to be etched in memory. And here's another fascinating detail of this journey. The brain uses familiar references to create these images. Falls, stumbles, and losses of balance are part of universal experiences. These are events that, throughout evolution, have always been associated with real danger. Therefore, when the brain needs to quickly explain a sudden movement, it resorts to this repertoire. It's an automatic decision based on old and efficient patterns. This mechanism doesn't only happen during sleep. It manifests itself at various times in life. When you get scared and then realize there was no danger, the brain has also created a quick story to justify the initial reaction. The hypnic jerk only makes this process more visible because it happens in a borderline state between consciousness and unconsciousness, where the underlying events are exposed. The more relaxed the body is, the more intense the sensation of falling tends to be. This is because the contrast between the state of deep rest and the sudden command sent to the muscles is greater. The brain perceives a radical change of state and needs to explain this transition. The mental image emerges as a bridge between two worlds, that of absolute relaxation and that of sudden activation. This phenomenon also reveals something important about mindset and control. During the day we are used to predicting, planning, and anticipating movements. At night, the brain tries to do the same but with less information available. When something deviates from the script, it reacts by creating meaning as quickly as possible. It doesn't matter if the story is real or not. What matters is reducing the feeling of internal chaos. That's why the dreams that accompany the shock are usually so short and intense. They have no beginning, middle, or end. They are flashes. Small scenes that appear only to fulfill a function, to explain the inexplicable. As soon as the brain understands that the body is safe, the image disappears. The narrative has fulfilled its role and doesn't need to continue. This ability to create instant narratives shows how hard the brain works to maintain the coherence of human experience. Even in altered states, even on the threshold of sleep, it seeks logic, sequence, and meaning. This is part of what makes us human. And, at the same time, it's what makes these experiences seem so mysterious and impactful. When we look at this process more closely, we realize that the hypnic jerk is not just a physical phenomenon, but also a psychological one. It involves perception, interpretation, and memory. It reveals how the brain constructs reality from fragments, how it makes decisions at extreme speed, and how it creates explanations even before we are aware of what is happening. This revelation changes how we perceive fright. It ceases to be something terrifying and becomes a clear example of the nervous system's intelligence. A system that prefers to create an improbable story rather than accept the emptiness of an explanation. A system that works tirelessly to maintain a sense of continuity, even when everything happens too fast. And when we understand this, an even greater curiosity arises. If the brain is capable of creating such vivid images in fractions of a second just to justify a movement, what else does it do during this intermediate state between wakefulness and sleep? What other silent processes are happening while consciousness begins to shut down, but the body still responds? Write it in the comments. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding what increases the likelihood of these jerks happening is like shedding light on everyday habits that almost no one associates with sleep. Most people believe that hypnic jerks arise out of nowhere, as if they were an isolated and unpredictable event. But the truth is that, most of the time, they are the direct result of a silent accumulation of stimuli, decisions, and patterns that build up throughout the day. Stress is one of the strongest factors behind this phenomenon. When you spend hours in a state of tension, solving problems, dealing with emotional pressure, or keeping your mind constantly alert, the brain learns to operate in vigilance mode. Even when the body lies down, the mind doesn't completely shut down. It continues monitoring, assessing risks, anticipating scenarios. This excessive alertness creates an internal conflict at the moment when sleep tries to take hold. The body relaxes, but the brain still doesn't fully trust this rest. The impact of this appears precisely in that unexpected jolt. Anxiety follows the same logic, but with an even deeper layer. It keeps the brain projected towards the future, trapped in possibilities, fears, and hypothetical scenarios. When an anxious person tries to sleep, there is a real difficulty in allowing complete surrender to rest. The brain interprets relaxation as a loss of control, and this activates protective mechanisms. The spasm arises as a reflection of this accelerated mindset, as if the system were saying, "It's not time to completely switch off yet." Another factor that weighs heavily in this equation is excessive caffeine consumption. Coffee, energy drinks, sodas, and even some stimulating teas keep the nervous system active for hours, even when the conscious effect seems to have passed. The person feels tired, but the brain is still chemically stimulated. This mismatch creates a perfect scenario for a hypnic jerk. The body tries to rest, while the brain receives warning signals. The result is this abrupt response, almost like a momentary short circuit. Sleep deprivation also has a profound impact. When you sleep poorly for several days in a row, the brain enters a state of exhaustion mixed with hyperactivity. It wants to shut down too quickly to compensate for tiredness, but at the same time remains disorganized. This accelerated transition increases the chances of synchronization failures between mind and body. Relaxation happens abruptly, and the brain reacts as if something is wrong. Intense exercise at night follows a similar pattern. Highly demanding physical activity raises heart rate, body temperature, and the release of adrenaline and cortisol. These effects don't disappear immediately after training. Even hours later, the body may still be in a state of activation. When a person lies down soon after this peak, the brain finds it difficult to slow down. It interprets the muscle shutdown as something strange, incompatible with the recent activation level. The spasm appears as an attempt at adjustment. And there is another factor that has become almost invisible because it is so common: the excessive use of screens before bed. Cell phones, computers, and televisions keep the brain exposed to blue light and constant stimuli. Notifications, videos, messages, and quick information train the mind to react all the time. When that same mind is placed in darkness and silence, the transition becomes too abrupt. The brain perceives the break in stimuli as something unexpected and reacts with a sudden command. What all of this has in common is the difficulty in slowing down. We live at a pace that demands quick responses, constant attention, and multiple decisions throughout the day. The body does get tired, but the brain gets used to remaining active. The hypnic jerk, in this context, ceases to be an isolated mystery and becomes a direct reflection of lifestyle. It shows the accumulated impact of daily choices on a moment that should be simple: sleep. There's a hidden truth here that few people realize. Sleep doesn't begin in bed. It begins with how you live your day. Every stimulus, every worry, every excess accumulates behind the scenes in the nervous system. When it's time to rest, the brain has to deal with all of that at once. If the load is too great, the shutdown doesn't happen smoothly. This understanding can be profoundly transformative because it changes the relationship with one's own body. Instead of seeing the jolt as an enemy or a defect, it becomes a signal, an indicator that something in the internal rhythm needs adjustment. It's not about eliminating the phenomenon at any cost, but about understanding what it is trying to communicate. The more you observe these patterns, the more you realize that hypnic jerks don't occur by chance. They appear more frequently during periods of change, pressure, important decisions, or excessive stimulation. They reveal how the brain reacts when pushed beyond its limits for too long. And this opens up space for greater reflection on balance, rest, and taking care of one's own journey. As these pieces fall into place, a natural curiosity arises. If external factors and daily habits influence this critical moment between wakefulness and sleep so much, to what extent can the hypnic jerk be adjusted or alleviated with small changes in routine? That's when the revelations begin to take on an even more practical and realistic aspect. If all of this resonated with you, write it in the comments. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after understanding what causes these jerks, A silent question almost automatically arises in many people's minds. Is this dangerous? Is there any real risk hidden behind this experience? This doubt is natural, especially because the hypnic jerk happens intensely, unexpectedly, and often frighteningly. The body jumps, the heart races, and the feeling is that something has gone out of control. But here it's important to separate sensation from reality. In the vast majority of cases, this phenomenon is completely normal and harmless. It is part of the natural functioning of the human brain and does not indicate disease, neurological failure, or heart problems. Millions of healthy people experience hypnic jerks throughout their lives, especially during periods of increased physical or mental fatigue. The emotional impact can be significant, but the physiological impact is, in most cases, minimal. The hidden truth is that the human brain is extremely cautious. It prefers to react 10 times unnecessarily than to fail even once when something truly matters. This overzealousness appears precisely during these moments of transition, when conscious control diminishes. The jolt is not a sign of imminent danger, but rather of a nervous system that is functioning and trying to ensure safety, even when there is no real threat. However, as with any bodily phenomenon, there are exceptions that deserve attention. Not to generate fear but to bring clarity. When spasms occur occasionally, especially at the onset of sleep, they are considered part of normal functioning. But if they start to occur many times during the same night, repetitively and intensely, it is worth observing more carefully. Not as an alarm but as a sign that something may be overloading the system. Another important point is the presence of other associated symptoms. If the jolt is accompanied by prolonged mental confusion, loss of consciousness, continuous involuntary movements, or a persistent feeling of weakness upon waking, this deviates from the typical pattern of a hypnic jerk. In these cases, the phenomenon ceases to be merely a sleep curiosity and deserves a more in-depth evaluation. Not because it is common but precisely because it is not. There is also a clear difference between hypnic jerks and other sleep disorders. A hypnic jerk occurs at the onset of sleep, lasts only a few seconds and does not repeat continuously. When the movements occur in other stages of sleep or last for a long time, the origin is usually different. This distinction is important to avoid mixing up different phenomena and creating unnecessary worries. What many people don't realize is the impact of emotional interpretation on this experience. When someone experiences the jolt with intense fear, they begin to anticipate the event on subsequent nights. This anticipation keeps the brain on alert, making relaxation difficult and increasing the chance of new spasms. A cycle is created. Fear fuels vigilance, vigilance fuels the phenomenon. Understanding that it is, in most cases, harmless already significantly reduces this cycle. Here's where a powerful aspect of mindset comes in. How you interpret what happens to your body directly influences the brain's response. When a spasm is seen as an enemy or a sign of something serious, the body reacts with more tension. When it's understood as an automatic reflex without real danger, the nervous system tends to relax more easily. This change in perspective can have a profound impact on the sleep experience. Sleep science clearly shows that the human body is not as fragile as we often imagine. It is resilient, adaptable, and full of protective mechanisms. The hypnic jerk is one of these mechanisms. It seems aggressive, but it arises from an attempt at self-care. The problem is not the jerk itself, but the context in which it occurs. Excessive stimuli, lack of rest, accumulated tension, and difficulty in slowing down. Therefore, in most cases there is no reason for concern. The phenomenon does not shorten life, does not damage the brain, and does not indicate a real loss of control. It merely reveals a moment of internal adjustment. A small clash between two very different states, alertness and rest. Understanding this brings tranquility and restores to the body the confidence needed to continue the natural sleep process. The more clarity there is about what is normal and what deviates from the norm, the safer the journey becomes for those experiencing this phenomenon. Knowledge acts as an antidote to fear. It transforms fright into curiosity, anxiety into observation, and doubt into understanding. And it is precisely from this point that a new layer of reflection emerges. If hypnic jerks are, in most cases, harmless and linked to the natural functioning of the brain, what can they teach us about how we are living, resting, and relating to our own bodies? Leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because when we look at this jolt more closely, it ceases to be just a curious detail of sleep and begins to reveal something much bigger about the human brain. This phenomenon starkly shows how sophisticated and primitive our minds are at the same time. We live surrounded by technology, logic, and planning, but ancient mechanisms shaped long before modern life existed, still operate inside our heads. The hypnic jerk demonstrates that the brain never completely shuts down. Even when you're about to fall asleep, even when consciousness begins to fade, there's a part of the system that remains vigilant. It's as if the brain is always assessing the environment, the body, and internal signals, ready to intervene if something seems out of the ordinary. This constant readiness is a direct legacy of survival. Throughout human evolution, sleep meant vulnerability. It was the time when predators could attack, falls could happen, and threats could arise without warning. The brain therefore learned to distrust total shutdown. It developed layers of protection that remain active even during rest. The jolt is one of these layers manifesting itself. A reflex that says much more about protection than about failure. This revelation is powerful because it dismantles the idea that we are entirely rational and conscious beings in control of everything. Much of what we do, feel, and react to happens before consciousness even comes into play. The brain makes decisions in milliseconds, based on old patterns, past experiences, and probabilities. The hypnic jerk is a clear example of this. A decision made without asking permission from the conscious mind. This also helps to understand why the phenomenon is so universal. People from different cultures, different ages, and different lifestyles report exactly the same sensation. This happens because we are talking about something structural, deeply rooted in the way the human brain works. It's not an individual error, it's not a personal flaw. It's a shared trait of our species. There's a hidden truth here that completely changes how we view rest. Sleeping isn't simply switching off. Sleeping is traversing a transitional territory, where the brain needs to ensure everything is safe before allowing complete surrender. For some people, this transition happens smoothly. For others, the brain hits the brakes for a moment just to check if everything is alright. This behavior reveals an internal mindset of maximum protection. The brain prefers to interrupt sleep for a few seconds rather than risk ignoring a signal that, in another context, could be fatal. Even if you are in a comfortable bed today in a safe environment, the brain has not fully updated itself to this reality. It still operates with old codes, written in a time when danger was constant. And this isn't limited to sleep. This same mechanism appears in disproportionate emotional reactions, in seemingly unmotivated frights, in automatic stress responses, and even in impulsive decisions. The brain acts first to protect, then assesses whether it has overreacted. Most of the time it does overreact. But this overreaction was, for a long time, what ensured the survival of our species. When we observe the hypnic jerk from this angle, it becomes a window into understanding the relationship between the primitive brain and modern life. We live in a world that demands constant productivity, continuous stimulation, and divided attention. The brain, on the other hand, continues to operate with a logic of threat and security. This imbalance generates tension, difficulty switching off, and phenomena such as the jolt when falling asleep. There's also a symbolic impact to all of this. The moment the body jerks is the moment you're about to lose conscious control. And losing control is something the brain doesn't like. The spasm arises as an attempt to hold the reins for one more second. It reveals how much the brain resists total surrender, even when that surrender is necessary for rest. This understanding can be profoundly transformative. Not in the sense of eliminating the phenomenon, but of seeing it as a sign of biological intelligence. A reminder that there is a part of you working tirelessly to keep you safe, even when you don't realize it. The jolt is not an enemy of sleep. It is an ancient guardian, perhaps a little exaggerated but well-intentioned. By understanding this, the relationship with one's own body changes. Fear gives way to curiosity. Tension makes room for observation. The phenomenon ceases to be something frightening and becomes a clear expression of human complexity. A small physical event that carries within it thousands of years of evolution, automatic decisions, and survival strategies. And the more we delve into this, the more evident it becomes that the human brain is a system full of layers. It thinks, feels, reacts, and protects all at the same time. Even when you sleep, something is attentive, monitoring, ready to act. This silent vigilance explains not only the hypnic jerk, but many other mysteries of human behavior that still surprise us. This understanding opens the door to even deeper reflection on rest, safety, and control. If the brain remains alert even during sleep, what does it truly mean to relax? To what extent can we actually trust our bodies and allow them to do what they have known how to do for millennia? It is at this point that the journey of understanding deepens even further, revealing layers that go far beyond a simple jolt before bed. If this resonated with you in any way, write it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, it's because this topic resonated with you on some level. Maybe because you've experienced this jolt before falling asleep, maybe because you've started to see your own body in a different way, or maybe because you've realized that these little mysteries say much more about who we are than they seem at first glance. And it's precisely this kind of conversation that gives meaning to this space. If it makes sense for you to continue exploring the inner workings of the human mind and body, subscribing to the channel is a simple way to follow this journey with me. All the content here is created with this intention, to transform bewilderment into understanding and curiosity into awareness. If you'd like, leave a comment saying you made it to the end. You could write something like, "This message was for me," or, "I'm with you until the end." This creates a real exchange here and shows that this conversation isn't just happening on one side of the screen. And if at any point you felt that silent connection, that's exactly it, leave a like. It helps this type of content continue to find people who also wonder about what goes on inside their own minds. There's a video over here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into these mysteries of the human brain. Click on it and continue watching.